If you look at a blueprint for a skyscraper, there's this deep sense of comfort in all those rigid blue lines.
Right, yeah, the structure.
Exactly. You can see the load-bearing walls, the electrical grids, the steel beams. I mean, everything is engineered for stability. Everything is transparent. It's a structure built to keep the darkness out and the people inside safe.
Absolutely.
But, what happens when you take that exact same meticulous architectural mind and just completely invert it? Like, what does it look like when someone uses the science of structural design not to build a sanctuary, but to engineer an invisible, inescapable trap?
Well, it looks like the most terrifying kind of camouflage imaginable. You get a predator who understands exactly how society is constructed, which means, they know exactly where all the structural weaknesses are hidden.
Yeah. And that brings us to today. Because for you listening, it is April 9, 2026. And yesterday afternoon, the ground completely shifted underneath one of the most infamous mysteries in American history.
It really did. It's monumental.
We have a massive stack of source material in front of us for this deep dive today. We're talking decades of case files, newly released psychological profiles, interviews with former coworkers, and of course, the breaking courtroom reports regarding Rex Heuermann.
The man the world came to know as the Gilgo Beach Killer.
Right. So the mission for our deep dive today is to take all these disparate pieces of evidence and reconstruct the mind of a man who maintained an absolute hermetically sealed double life for over 30 years.
And we need to look at the exact intersection of digital forensics, the microscopic frontiers of DNA technology, and just relentless shoe leather police work that finally breached the walls of his fortress.
Because the contrast between his daytime reality and his nighttime reality is staggering. By day, he's this esteemed Manhattan architect, a guy in a suit who prided himself on being a troubleshooter, right? Navigating the insanely complex building codes of New York City.
Right, a professional problem solver.
Exactly. But by night, he is maintaining a literal, typed-out blueprint on his hard drive, detailing step-by-step instructions for murder, concealment, and the destruction of evidence.
And that dichotomy is really the core of this entire analysis. You are looking at someone who spent his days constructing physical structures in the light, while simultaneously designing a psychological labyrinth in the dark to destroy human beings.
It's chilling. And I think to really understand the magnitude of what happened in that courtroom yesterday, we have to start with the camouflage.
Yeah, the persona.
Right. We have to look at the persona he projected to you and me, to the world. Because it wasn't the stereotypical lone wolf hiding in a cabin in the woods. Heuermann grew up in Massapequa Park on Long Island.
Which is a very typical suburban environment.
Very typical. And he actually bought his childhood home, this somewhat run-down 1950s ranch house, from his own mother in 1994.
And the timing of that purchase is incredibly revealing. Because 1994 is the exact same year he launched his architectural firm, RH Consultants and Associates, in Manhattan.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize those lined up so perfectly.
They do. And think about the psychological anchoring happening there. He is embedding himself in the exact geographic footprint of his youth, claiming it as his permanent domain, while simultaneously planting his flag in one of the most aggressive, competitive real estate markets on the planet.
Right. Manhattan real estate is no joke.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He wasn't operating on the fringes. He was doing work for Target, American Airlines, Catholic Charities. I mean, he was woven into the corporate infrastructure of the city.
There is this interview he gave in 2022 to a YouTube channel called Bonjour Realty.
Oh, yeah. That video.
Watching it now, knowing what we know, it literally makes your blood run cold. He is sitting there, utterly arrogant, bragging about his ability to outwit the city's Department of Buildings.
He literally chuckles at the idea that city workers can't even comprehend the laws they're supposed to enforce.
Yes, he calls himself a facilitator.
And pay close attention to the vocabulary he chooses there. A facilitator, someone who removes obstacles, someone who finds the hidden pathways that others are too ignorant to see. He viewed himself as possessing this superior intellect, just hovering above the bureaucratic noise.
And the interviewer actually asked him this somewhat cheesy hypothetical question. He says, if you could be any tool to help elevate your business, what would you be?
Right.
And his answer is so chillingly specific. He says he would be a cabinet maker's hammer. And the reason he gives is that it is, quote, persuasive enough when I need to persuade something, and it always yields excellent results.
The psychology embedded in that single sentence is profound because, cabinet maker's hammer is a tool designed for fine, detailed finishing work. But at its core,
it's still hammer.
It's still an instrument of blunt force trauma. He is openly telling the interviewer and the world, really, that his preferred method of interaction is coercion disguised as professional utility. He forces pieces into the spaces he designates for them.
But, when you start reading through the accounts of the people who actually worked for him, you realize that Hammer wasn't always disguised very well.
Not at all.
His employees experienced a very different Rex Heuermann than that confident architect on YouTube.
Yeah, the workplace essentially became a testing ground for his need for dominance.
Yeah.
The interviews with his staff paint this picture of relentless boundary pushing and subtle intimidation.
Take the story from Muriel Henriquez, one of his employees. So, in the summer of 2007, he gives her a sweater as a gift.
Right.
And he tells her his wife bought it during a trip to Iceland. And just for everyone listening, flag that Iceland trip in your mind because it is going to become one of the most critical pieces of the entire timeline later on.
Absolutely crucial.
But at the time, Muriel just thinks it's a slightly weird gift from an awkward boss.
But then the behavior escalates from awkward to predatory.
Right. So she's getting ready to go on a cruise to celebrate her 40th birthday, and she jokingly tells him, I'm going to be in the middle of the ocean. You're not going to find me.
Just normal office banter.
Exactly. And he looks at her and says, "Oh, yes, I can."
Which, on the surface, you could brush that off as a bad workplace joke. An overly controlling boss pretending he can't survive without his staff.
Except she gets on the ship, she is on the second day at sea, and she finds a white envelope slid underneath the door of her cabin. She opens it, and it's a note from Rex. It just says, "I told you I could find you anywhere."
I mean, stop and break down the logistical mechanics required to execute that quote-unquote joke in 2007.
You're right, this isn't sending a text message.
No. He had to discover the exact cruise line she booked. He had to find out the specific ship and the departure itinerary. He had to somehow bypass passenger privacy protocols to get her exact cabin number.
Wow.
And then he had to either pay off a crew member, coordinate with a passenger, or use some other covert channel to ensure a physical piece of paper was slipped under her door while she was literally floating in international waters.
That is a breathtaking expenditure of energy just to prove a point.
It is a demonstration of omnipotence. He is mapping her physical location and telling her that her boundaries are an illusion.
Another coworker, Mary Schell, described his obsession with hunting. She said he loved the thrill of, quote, "stalking prey and winning." But it wasn't just typical hunting stories, right?
No, it was deeply unsettling. He would corner employees and have these highly disturbing conversations about the mechanics of processing meat. He specifically detailed how bear meat could be preserved for months in a freezer, provided it was tightly wrapped in burlap.
Burlap, the exact same coarse woven material that investigators would later find binding the remains of multiple victims buried along Ocean Parkway.
Exactly. He was taking the physical materials of his horrific secondary life and dragging them right into the fluorescent lighting of his architectural firm, testing to see if anyone would put the pieces together.
And he coupled that with this gross misogyny. I mean, he was a massive guy, 6'4", and he would use that physical presence to demean the women in his office.
Right.
If he felt the night cleaning crew hadn't done a good enough job, he would force his female employees to scrub the office toilets. He commented on their bodies, their weight.
And the need to degrade women in his immediate vicinity speaks to a deeply rooted anger. When you trace his psychological history back to his childhood, the origins of that rage really start to come into focus.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
So John Carisi, a childhood friend, provided accounts of Heuermann being severely and relentlessly bullied. Despite his massive size, even as a kid, he never fought back. He was socially isolated, taking the abuse silently.
It seems like that early powerlessness just mutated because a neighbor in Massapequa Park told investigators that as an adult, Heuermann would stand in his yard and just silently stare over the fence at the neighbor's wife while she was sunbathing.
Unbelievable.
And it happened so often that the husband finally had to confront him. And Heuermann didn't argue or apologize. He just turned around and walked away.
Right, and that is the behavior of a predator testing the perimeter. He applies pressure to see if a boundary holds. When the neighbor confronted him, a stronger force pushed back, so he retreated.
Just recalibrates.
Exactly. He internalizes the humiliation, stores the rage, and recalibrates, seeking out a target that lacks the social or physical power to push back.
This actually brings up a parallel that I cannot stop thinking about. So his entire professional life is dedicated to finding loopholes in New York City building codes, right?
Right.
He studies the rules of society's structures to figure out how to bypass them legally. It feels like he applied that exact same architectural philosophy to his predatory life.
How so?
Well, he looked at the social structure of society, identified the marginalized populations in this case, vulnerable sex workers, many dealing with addiction or financial ruin, and realized they were a societal loophole. He calculated that their disappearances wouldn't trigger the same immediate, massive structural response from law enforcement.
That is a highly precise way to frame his methodology. He recognized that the justice system, much like a building code, has blind spots. He exploited the systemic vulnerabilities of his victims to build his secret life. And he built a physical sanctuary for that life right underneath his childhood home.
Right. When investigators finally breached the Massapequa Park house, they discovered a soundproof vault hidden in the basement, a literal fortress within a fortress containing 279 weapons.
The vault is the ultimate physical manifestation of his compartmentalization. It's a sealed-off subterranean space where the architect's control is absolute.
But the question is, how did the police finally find the door to that vault? I mean, he'd been operating in the shadows for almost 2 decades. The trail was incredibly cold. How do you catch a ghost who knows all the loopholes?
Well, that brings us to the digital investigation.
Because Heuermann believed his operational security was flawless. But his reliance on the invisible architecture of cell phone networks became the very thing that trapped him.
The breakthrough really begins in 2022. You have this newly formed multi-agency task force spearheaded by Suffolk County District Attorney Ray Tierney.
Right.
And instead of just looking at the physical evidence, they went back to the raw foundational data from 2009 and 2010. They isolated the prepaid, anonymous burner phones the killer used to contact the victims before they vanished.
But wait, burner phones are supposed to be untraceable. You buy them with cash, use them, and throw them away.
Untraceable in terms of the subscriber name, yes. But they were still electronic devices constantly seeking a connection to the network. And the FBI used historical cell site data to map exactly where those phones were physically located when they connected to the towers.
I really want to understand the mechanics of this because it's not just a dot on a map, right? Like, how does a cell tower actually prove where a burner phone is?
It comes down to radio frequency analysis and geometry. So a cell tower isn't just a single antenna broadcasting in a perfect circle. It's usually divided into 320-degree sectors.
Okay, like slices of a pie.
Exactly. When a phone makes a call, or even just powers on and pings the network, it connects to the specific sector facing it. By analyzing the time it takes for the signal to travel between the phone and multiple surrounding towers, a process similar to triangulation analysts can draw a highly specific geographic wedge showing the phone's physical location.
Oh, wow. So they pull the data for these burner phones, they map out the pinging, and a terrifying pattern emerges. The locations aren't random.
No, not at all.
The FBI realizes the burner phones are consistently pinging in 2 very dense, specific areas. One cluster is in a tight radius in Massapequa Park,
Which investigators designated as the Massapequa Box.
and the second cluster is right in the heart of Midtown Manhattan, which perfectly overlays the 2 anchor points of Rex Heuermann's life: his childhood home in the Box and his architectural firm on 36th Street in Midtown.
But, the mapping doesn't just show where the calls to the victims originated. It also tracked the taunting calls.
Right, and this is arguably the most sadistic element of his entire psychological profile. July 2009. A 24-year-old woman named Melissa Barthelemy goes missing.
Yes.
Days later, her 15-year-old sister, Amanda, answers the phone. It is a man calling from Melissa's own cell phone.
The caller spends weeks terrorizing this teenager. He asks her horrifying questions about her sister and eventually states with absolute bluntness, "I killed Melissa."
When the task force mapped those specific calls, they found the killer was standing in crowded, bustling areas of Midtown Manhattan. I mean, he is surrounded by thousands of people, literally blocks away from his Fifth Avenue office, using a murdered woman's phone to psychologically torture her little sister.
He is hiding in the sheer volume of the city. It's the ultimate expression of his superiority complex. He feels entirely invisible in plain sight.
But the digital map was only half the equation, right? They needed a physical vehicle to place inside that mapped box, and they found it buried in a witness statement from September 2010 connected to the disappearance of Amber Costello.
Right? Amber's roommate, Dave Schaller, actually survived an encounter with the man who would eventually take Amber. Schaller described a massive, ogre-like client who had been aggressively pursuing her, offering her a highly unusual sum of $1,500 just to leave her house without her purse or phone.
A textbook isolation tactic. separate the target from their communication and their resources.
Precisely. But more importantly, Schaller gave investigators a description of the client's vehicle. He noted the man was driving a dark, first-generation Chevrolet Avalanche.
So cut to 2022. The task force takes the Massapequa Box and they run a search through the New York State Department of Motor Vehicles database. They are looking for a first-generation Chevy Avalanche registered to a tall, heavily built male living inside those specific geographic coordinates.
And the intersection of those data points spits out a single name: Rex Heuermann. The Phantom suddenly has a driver's license.
It's incredible. And once they have his name, they pull his personal cell phone records, and they find that his personal phone is shadowing the burner phones.
Tracking perfectly.
Right. When the burner phone pings a tower in Massapequa, his personal phone is pinging the exact same tower. When the burner travels to Midtown, his personal phone travels to Midtown.
And this authorization allows them to subpoena his broader digital life. They uncover multiple burner email accounts using aliases like John Springfield, Thomas Hawk, and Hunter 1903A3.
Wow.
Through these accounts, the structural integrity of his double life is laid bare. He is executing thousands of searches for hyper-violent, torture-related pornography.
He is also obsessively monitoring the police. He's searching for updates on the Gilgo Beach task force, and most chillingly, he is searching for the family members of his victims. He's actively tracking their siblings and children online.
All about control.
But, I keep getting stuck on this one contradiction. We are talking about a guy who drafts meticulous blueprints, a guy who studies the minutiae of building codes. Why would someone that obsessed with operational security use burner phones inside his own neighborhood and blocks from his own office?
It seems reckless.
Exactly. Was he essentially building a massive digital firewall but leaving the front door wide open just to see if the police were smart enough to walk through?
It is tempting to view it as a masterstroke of arrogance, a deliberate game of cat and mouse. But the reality of criminal psychology is usually much more prosaic. What you are seeing is behavioral decay.
Behavioral decay.
Yeah, maintaining absolute flawless operational security over the span of 17 years is exhausting. It requires an unsustainable level of vigilance. He got sloppy.
So he just got comfortable.
He relied on the analog anonymity of the early 2000s, believing the sheer density of New York City and the sprawl of the suburbs provided permanent cover. He failed to anticipate the evolution of cellular forensics. He didn't realize that the invisible handshakes between a phone and a tower were drawing a permanent, unerasable map directly to his front door.
So the digital forensics give the task force a map. It puts him in the crosshairs. But cell tower pings don't prove murder. To secure an indictment, they have to move from the digital realm into the physical realm.
Right.
They need biological evidence tying the architect to the bodies on the beach.
Which brings us to the microscopic thread, the transition from macro-level data analysis to the granular reality of DNA.
And the way they acquired that DNA is straight out of a noir thriller. It is January 2023. The task force has Heuermann under round-the-clock covert surveillance. Plainclothes detectives are tailing him through the streets of Manhattan. They can't just ask him for a cheek swab. They need abandoned, discarded DNA.
They're essentially waiting for a mistake. They shadow him until he stops for a slice of pizza. He finishes eating, wipes his mouth, and tosses the partially eaten pizza box into a public trash can on the sidewalk.
The detectives immediately retrieve that box. They extract a biological profile from the saliva left on the pizza crust and send it to the crime lab.
And what the lab discovers is the fulcrum of the entire case. The DNA from that discarded Manhattan pizza crust is a direct match to a single microscopic male hair that investigators had recovered over a decade earlier.
A hair found resting on the burlap used to restrain Megan Waterman.
Exactly. And the statistical probability of that profile is astronomically small. It's found in something like 0.04% of the human population.
But the physical evidence gets infinitely more complex and frankly more fascinating from a scientific perspective when we look at the other hairs found on the victims.
Yes. This is where the concept of transfer DNA becomes the star witness of the prosecution. Investigators had also recovered female hairs from the remains. Through DNA analysis, they identified these hairs as belonging to Heuermann's wife, Asa Ellerup, and his daughter, Victoria.
Now, a defense attorney, or just a random person reading the headlines, might instantly think, wait, if the wife's hair is on the body, the wife must be involved.
But the task force used the exact science of how hair sheds and travels to prove the exact opposite. The presence of the family's hair became the very mechanism that exonerated them and cemented Heuermann's guilt.
Walk us through the physical mechanics of how that transfer actually happens, because the logic they used is brilliant.
Okay, so think about the physical environment of the Massapequa Park house. A human being naturally sheds dozens of hairs every single day. Over years of living in that house, Asa and Victoria's hair is embedded in the carpets, the furniture, the laundry machines, the beds.
Right.
Rex Heuermann lives in that same ecosystem. He sits on the couch, he puts on a jacket from the closet. The shed hair from his wife and daughter adheres to his clothing.
It's hitchhiking.
Exactly. It's a secondary transfer. He then leaves the house wearing clothes, carrying their genetic material, and goes out to commit murder.
Yeah.
During the struggle, or during the meticulous process of binding the victims in the burlap he stored at his house, those female hairs fall off his sleeve and transfer onto the victims.
And the prosecution proves this secondary transfer theory by cross-referencing the DNA with travel records. They audited the family's movements and proved definitively that Asa and the children were thousands of miles away when these women were killed.
The alibi is airtight.
Completely. For example, in August 2009, when Melissa Barthelemy vanished, Asa was on that trip to Iceland, the exact trip where Heuermann bought that sweater for his coworker.
Right.
When Megan Waterman and Amber Costello disappeared in 2010, the family was out of state in Maryland and New Jersey. When Maureen Brainerd Barnes went missing in 2007, the family was in Atlantic City.
So the timeline data acts as an impenetrable alibi for the family, transforming their DNA from a sign of complicity into a microscopic tracking device that points exclusively to the husband who stayed behind in the empty house.
But the defense team fought this science tooth and nail. In June 2025, Heuermann's attorney, Michael Brown, initiated a Fry hearing. For anyone unfamiliar, a Fry hearing in New York is essentially a scientific gatekeeping trial. The judge has to determine if a specific scientific method is generally accepted by the expert community before a jury is ever allowed to hear about it.
And the defense's strategy was to attack the most cutting-edge piece of the forensic puzzle, which was a California laboratory called Astraea Forensics.
Right, because Astraea extracted DNA from hairs that didn't have a root attached. Historically, if you found a piece of hair at a crime scene, that the follicle, the little fleshy bulb at the end was missing, you couldn't get a full nuclear DNA profile.
Historically, without the root, forensic scientists could only extract mitochondrial DNA from the hair shaft. Mitochondrial DNA is passed down from the mother, meaning it can only link a suspect to a maternal lineage, not identify a specific, unique individual. It's a broad brush, not a laser pointer.
But Astraea uses this new technology, something called IBDGEM software, to pull identifying data straight from the rootless shaft. How does a software program pull unique DNA out of dead keratin?
It's a massive leap forward in whole genome sequencing. Even in the dead keratinized shaft of a hair, there are microscopic, highly degraded fragments of nuclear DNA.
Okay.
Astraea's technology doesn't try to find a complete intact DNA strand. Instead, it extracts those shattered fragments and sequences them, looking for specific markers called single nucleotide polymorphisms, or SNPs.
SNPs, said it.
The software acts like an incredibly advanced algorithm, solving a billion-piece puzzle, analyzing the patterns of these SNPs to reconstruct a unique genetic profile from the damaged fragments.
And the defense expert, Nathaniel Adams, argued that this software was essentially a proprietary black box. He claimed the algorithms hadn't been properly validated by independent peers and shouldn't be trusted in a murder trial. Michael Brown even stood in court and called the technology magic.
They're trying to create reasonable doubt about the mathematics behind the sequencing.
They didn't just attack the software, though. They attacked the pizza crust itself. The defense filed motions arguing that harvesting Heuermann's DNA from public garbage violated his Fourth Amendment right against unreasonable search and seizure.
Which is an aggressive legal maneuver to claim an expectation of privacy over a piece of trash abandoned in a public receptacle on a crowded Manhattan street. District Attorney Tierney countered that abandoned property carries zero constitutional protection. Once you throw it away in public, you surrender your rights to it.
The judge ultimately sided with the prosecution. The science was sound, the collection was legal, and the net finally pulled tight. Which means we move from the sterile arguments of the courtroom to the brutal reality of the arrest.
July 13th, 2023.
Yes. Plainclothes officers surround the architect right near his Fifth Avenue office.
And the psychological shift in his demeanor at the moment of capture is just a masterclass in the collapse of a narcissistic structure.
His initial reaction is pure deflection. He plays the indignant professional. He asks the arresting officers, "What is this about? And what did I do?" He insists it's a mistake.
That initial denial is standard. He is attempting to project the authority of his daytime persona to intimidate the police into backing down. But it's what happens during his initial processing that is truly jarring.
If you read the prisoner logs from his first 24 hours in custody at police headquarters in Yafeng, the sheer banality of it is mind-bending. He is completely calm. After being fingerprinted and photographed for some of the most horrific serial killings in the country, his primary concern is his stomach. He sits there eating French fries and onion rings. He drinks a Coca-Cola. He informs the staff he is diabetic but casually refuses his medication. And then he just goes to sleep in a chair for 5 hours.
It highlights a chilling level of compartmentalization. His physiological system isn't flooded with panic or remorse. The machinery just switches gears to baseline survival and rest.
And the arrogance flashes one last time. As court officers are escorting him, he asks about his personal belongings. They inform him that a $6,000 watch he was wearing is not being transferred with him to the courthouse. He just shrugs and says, "I guess I won't be needing that."
A rare moment of pragmatic self-awareness. He recognizes that the currency of his former life status symbols and wealth holds zero value in the ecosystem he is about to enter.
So he is transferred to the Suffolk County Jail and placed in a 60-square-foot cell. And the man who spent decades micromanaging building codes, burner phones, fake email aliases, and complex murder logistics suddenly just stops.
Completely shuts down.
Sheriff Errol Toulon Jr. reported that Heuermann was placed on suicide watch and was highly compliant. When the sheriff observed him, Heuermann spent the vast majority of his time lying on his bunk, silently staring up at the ceiling.
He was completely immobilized.
How do you explain that psychological freefall? To go from a mastermind juggling a dozen invisible plates to a guy staring at concrete, it's like the moment they confiscated his master blueprint, the entire machine just powered down.
Because the machine required the environment of freedom to operate. His entire psychological architecture was built on the foundation of hidden control.
Right.
He dictated the rules, the locations, and the outcomes.
Right.
When the state removes you from society, strips you of your clothes, locks you in a 60-square-foot box, and dictates when you eat and when the lights turn off, the illusion of omnipotence shatters. There are no building codes to manipulate in a jail cell. There are no loopholes.
Wow.
The architect has absolutely nothing left to build. So the system crashes, and he retreats into a catatonic silence.
Adding a layer of dark irony to his confinement, 2 sex workers who were incarcerated in the same facility actually recognized him. They identified him to jail staff as a past client who had contacted them on the outside, though they had luckily chosen not to engage with his services. Even locked in a cage, the ghosts of his hunting ground were surrounding him.
It's haunting.
But while he lay in silence staring at the ceiling, the blast radius of his arrest was completely annihilating the lives of the people who loved him. And we have to look at the collateral damage because the tragedy of a serial predator extends far beyond the crime scenes.
The families of the perpetrators are thrust into an unimaginable reality. They are subjected to global scrutiny and often misdirected public anger, entirely due to the actions of a person they thought they knew.
We have to talk about Asa Ellerup, his wife of over 25 years, and his daughter, Victoria. They recently allowed cameras into their lives for a Peacock documentary called The Gilgo Beach Killer, House of Secrets.
Yes, I saw that.
And watching Asa navigate this fallout is devastating. She met him when she was 18 years old. He paid for her first divorce. For 2.5 decades, she believed they were building a normal, suburban family.
Imagine the catastrophic cognitive dissonance required to reconcile the man you share a bed with, the man who provides for your family, with a monster who binds women in burlap.
And the timing of the arrest compounded her trauma exponentially. Asa has been battling severe concurrent health crises, both breast cancer and skin cancer. Because Rex was the primary breadwinner, his incarceration threatened her health insurance and financial stability.
She had to file for divorce.
She did, but she explicitly stated it was a legal maneuver to protect the family's assets so she wouldn't lose her medical care. Emotionally, she was still tethered to him. During the filming of the documentary, she still referred to him as her husband. She visited him.
Which is a deeply ingrained survival mechanism. When the foundation of your reality is violently ripped away, the human brain will desperately cling to the familiar structures, even if those structures are revealed to be toxic. She couldn't instantly sever a 25-year bond.
The psychological toll on the children is equally harrowing. There is his son, Christopher, who has developmental disabilities, and his daughter, Victoria. Victoria actually worked alongside her father at his architectural firm.
Right.
She sat in front of the documentary cameras and initially defended him. She said she thought her dad was an open book, She rationalized his behavior. She knew he hunted. She knew he owned guns. So the evidence in the basement didn't immediately compute as serial murder to her.
But as the forensic data became public, the DNA, the cell tower overlaps, the Iceland timeline, the walls of that denial began to buckle under the weight of the evidence.
Right before the documentary premiered, the producers released a public statement. They revealed that after reviewing the totality of the facts, Victoria had finally reached the crushing conclusion that her father was, quote, most likely the killer.
This is the ultimate, unseen cruelty of the organized predator. They weaponize normalcy. They use suburban homes, wives, and children as a human shield. By maintaining the exhausting facade of a boring, reliable family man, they deflect the gaze of society.
They hide right behind their families.
He essentially used his family's existence as a structural support for his camouflage, knowing the revelation would eventually destroy them.
Fortunately, the culture surrounding true crime has evolved to recognize this dynamic. During the media storm, Asa actually received public support and guidance from Melissa Moore, the daughter of the Happy Face Killer, and Carrie Rawson, the daughter of the BTK Killer.
And the intervention of people like Moore and Rawson is vital. They are among the few human beings on Earth who understand the precise psychological gravity of discovering your father is a monster. They help educate the public that the family members are surviving victims of an incredibly intimate deception.
All of this, the forensic breakthroughs, the legal battles, the family's agony, finally reached a climax yesterday, April 8th, 2026. After 3 years of insisting on his innocence, the architect walked into a courtroom and the entire facade dropped.
He pleaded guilty.
And the scale of the plea was staggering. He didn't just admit to the murders of the Gilgo Four, Maureen Brainerd Barnes, Melissa Barthelemy, Megan Waterman, and Amber Costello. He pleaded guilty to the murders of Sandra Costilla, Jessica Taylor, and Valerie Mack.
But the courtroom was truly stunned when he confessed to an eighth, previously uncharged murder.
Karen Vergata, a woman who vanished in 1996, decades before the task force was even formed. 8 women, 8 lives extinguished over a 14-year span. And the reporters in the courtroom noted that his demeanor during the confession was utterly devoid of humanity.
Not surprising, given his profile.
He stood there in a black suit, unemotional, answering the judge's questions in a flat, methodical tone. He never once turned around to look at the gallery where the families of the women he slaughtered were sobbing.
He maintained his pathological detachment to the final second. He wasn't offering an apology. He was delivering a status report on a collapsed project.
He admitted to every mechanical detail. He admitted to purchasing the burner phones, using the promise of money to lure women to isolated locations, strangling them, dismembering some, and meticulously binding their remains in hunting burlap to dispose of them in the brush along Ocean Parkway.
The prosecution also finally unsealed the details of the blueprint document found on his hard drive.
This document is pure nightmare fuel. It was a literal, typed-out project management checklist for murder. It included bullet points reminding himself to limit noise, instructions on how to properly wash the bodies to eliminate trace DNA, and protocols for systematically destroying the evidence.
It removes any lingering doubt about impulse or temporary insanity. This was industrial-scale, premeditated sadism.
The legal resolution ensures he will never see the outside of a concrete wall. He was handed multiple consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, amounting to a sentence of life plus 100 years.
The finality of that sentence is what the families have been waiting for since 2009.
You could hear the exhaustion and the relief in their voices outside the courthouse. Melissa Cann, the sister of Maureen Brainerd Barnes, described the verdict as the end of a long journey of hope. Elizabeth Baxgill, Jessica Taylor's mother, told the press that the guilty plea took a big chunk of stress off.
The defense attorney, Michael Brown, claimed that Heuermann accepted the plea deal to spare his family and the victims' families the grueling trauma of a public trial.
Right.
Though looking at his psychological profile, it is equally likely he pleaded guilty to spare himself the narcissistic injury of having his failures, sloppiness, and sadism scrutinized by the world for months on end.
So we step back and look at the entirety of this deep dive. We have tracked a man who felt so invincible that he stood in the blinding daylight of Manhattan, using a dead woman's phone to taunt her teenage sister. And we watched that invincibility crumble under the weight of microscopic science. A single hair, hitchhiking on a piece of clothing matching the saliva on a discarded pizza crust. It is a testament to the fact that no matter how brilliant the architect thinks he exists in a physical world that remembers everything.
It is a profound warning to any predator operating under the illusion of control. The timeline of justice is no longer bound by the initial investigation. The physical world sheds data, digital, biological, geographical, and science does not forget.
But I want to leave you, the listener, with one final unresolved thought as we close this file, because part of Heuermann's plea agreement includes a very specific stipulation. He has agreed to cooperate fully with the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit for academic and scientific study.
It is a fascinating condition, and it sets up an incredible psychological chess match.
Imagine being a fly on the wall in that interview room. Rex Heuermann spent 3 decades using his meticulous architectural mind to construct an impenetrable fortress of lies. Now, he's going to sit across a metal table from the elite profilers of the FBI. What happens in that room? Will his towering ego compel him to finally surrender the master blueprints of his mind, explaining every horrific detail just to prove how smart he was, ultimately helping law enforcement catch future killers? Or is this entire cooperation agreement just the architect designing one last manipulative game, building a new labyrinth to play from behind bars?
When you study a predator of this magnitude, you have to accept that they view every interaction as an opportunity for leverage. They don't give away information, they trade it for control.
The physical structures are finally locked down, but the psychological blueprints will always be drawn in the shadows. Thank you for taking this deep dive with us.